how do we do things without killing people, which is what organic agriculture is. Organic agriculture says we can kill bugs as long as we don't use toxic chemicals, meaning toxic to people. So we can't use man-made toxic chemicals. So I would be on a show and someone would say, how do you deal with the ants? There's a long story about that that has to do with the Amazon, which I might get to later. But people would say, what do I do with the ants? And the organic guys would say, well, you can wipe up their trails with vinegar and destroy the trails so they don't come in, or you can, put different things that repel them, But all that is still war with the ants. It's not toxic to people, but it's still you versus nature. So in permaculture, and I'm going to get the start of this, which is where it came from, I always say, feed your enemies and house your friends. So if the ants are causing problems for you, I want to feed them. So I go outside and I put a piece of bread with peanut butter and a piece of bread with honey on it outside the house. And in 5 minutes, I know what these ants are eating. They're either fat-eating ants or they're sugar-eating ants. And then I go in the house because by the time I get there, the ants are gone. They're out there eating. They're not looking at my house for anything to eat anymore. So what I did is instead of fight the ants, I just fed them where they wanted to live. And if I start having ants in the house, I know that they've eaten all the peanut butter. It's time to put a little more out there, So I don't have to go to war with the ants because whenever you try to throw Mother Nature out the window, she comes back in the door with a pitchfork and she's pissed, okay? So it's much better to work with nature than try to oppose nature because nature always wins in the end, right? So what we're going to be talking about today is how people and the planet can work together for each other's benefit and provide lots of surpluses. I'll take a couple last questions and I'll launch into this.
I drive a biodiesel car,
Mm-hmm.
and biodiesel car vehicles, will this technology, can it be transferred over into the alcohol technology?
We'll talk about biodiesel and alcohol. There's several little interesting issues.
I'm interested in energy in, energy out process.
Okay. I was hoping somebody would ask that today. Energy, return on energy invested is the usual way it's described.
Environmental sustainability is obviously very important. However, economic sustainability, you mentioned excess of surplus. We're talking about import or exports. So can this type of business
environment versus
well, it shouldn't have to
economics.
Be. It should.
Is there a problem with that, or does it work together?
I believe it does,
and so do I. And so we'll be talking about that. You want to know if there's a conflict between environmental concerns and economic concerns in making alcohol? No.
No.
What's your question?
I believe that they can coexist,
yeah.
And I'm wondering if this business can be economically sustainable without government subsidies.
Oh, yeah, okay. Subsidies. And the question about subsidies, not a problem. We'll specifically talk about these things as well as other questions you might ask as we go along.
Oh, did you put my question on there about the waste resources versus grown resources?
Yes, I'll put it right up here near the weeds thing, waste versus crops.
Good.
You bet we'll be talking about that. Okay. Well, now I think we have everybody here. You guys got to ask all the questions because you were here on time, so that was at least one bonus for you. So what happens if we don't go to alcohol? Well, here are some examples that we have all seen in the last few years. The first one, of course, is you're seeing a nuclear explosion at Fukushima. That's not a chemical explosion. And, of course, that's what was left in the building afterwards. And, of course, for those of us who have really short memories, that is, of course, the Deepwater Horizon, one of the silliest pieces of technology ever built, and pretending you can drill 5 miles beneath the ocean without consequence into 10,000 psi oil was, well, a spectacular failure. And so this is the desperation we're going to in order to power ourselves as we start to see the easy-to-get-at oil disappear. What's that, Tom? Oh, I have a pointer. That's right, instead of just waving my hand. So I'm not going to use the term peak oil. I mean, we've all heard that, and there's lots of debate about whether it's true or not. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to liquid petroleum, we have less every year. So we've changed the definition of petroleum to include tar sands, oil shale. We're talking now coal to gasoline is considered conventional energy. So by changing the rules or the names of what we call petroleum, we appear not to be running out as fast as all the people were saying years ago. But there's no denying that the easy to get at liquid oil, that's way in decline. Everything from now on is at least this hard to get. And so do we want to go to a path of really toxic, like, Keystone Pipeline, tar sands oil? Do we want to drill 5 miles beneath the ocean just to keep the energy matrix the way it is? And I would argue that that's not working out very well for us. We should be looking at things that are a little less dangerous, a little more economical, and the radical thought that maybe the money for energy should get spread around a little more widely than go to the same handful of pockets that it's gone to so far. Next. Alcohol offers us a way to do that. Making alcohol, we're talking about plain old moonshine here, but quite pure to use as a fuel, is made in a pretty natural way. Plants absorb water, carbon dioxide, and that makes carbohydrates when you combine it with sunlight. So carbo is carbon dioxide, hydrate is water, and sunlight glues it together into starches and sugars, which we then ferment, distill, making it into alcohol, and then we use it to fuel the car. So when we burn the alcohol, what goes out the exhaust pipe is carbon dioxide, water, same thing you and I are breathing out right now. And what drives the car down the road is the solar energy exploding in the engine. So again, carbohydrates are made out of carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. Nothing from the soil ends up in starch or sugar, and therefore does not end up in alcohol either. So we're not mining the soil minerals to make alcohol. It's just the solar part of the plant. Now, of course, there are soil minerals taken up by plants, and you'll see where those go as we talk more about the whole process. I mean, it is possible to do good things stupidly, and we're not proposing to do it that way. Next.
I didn't quite get that, what you said about that it's not the minerals.
Right, because there's no minerals, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, in alcohol. There's only carbon dioxide, water, that's where the hydrogen comes from, and oxygen from the air. Those are the only three things that are in alcohol: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Plants use minerals to make carbohydrates. They need it for their mechanisms to do it, but we're not using those when we ferment corn or sugar cane or sugar beets or cattails or kelp. None of the minerals that are in those plants end up in the alcohol.
So they stay in the pulp.
They stay in the leftover byproduct, which we then show you where that goes, either back to the soil or back into animal feed or human food or whatever. But still, those important minerals still get recycled and used. Next. So when we're making alcohol, we've got to look at some of the benefits. First of all, for once, it doesn't cost more to do the right thing. Gasoline, as we all know, is pushing $4 a gallon. We can make alcohol for about $1 per gallon from a wide variety of materials. That's from crop-based. Now, you asked about waste. From waste materials, the operating cost of our alcohol plant is only about 30-40 cents a gallon. So if the raw material is essentially at hand and available, let's say food processing waste, etc., and we'll talk more about that, the actual cost of making the fuel once you have the waste is very low. If you have to add in the cost of a crop, well, it might be $1, $1.20, but it's still very, very reasonable compared to modern fossil fuels.
Could you define, please, the $1, what aspect of the production is costing $1?
That's all the production costs, the amortization of the alcohol plant, the energy, the labor, all of those things together. And we'll show you how that comes together. And that's without subsidies. The environmental benefits are, well, back in the if you want to go back to some of the other benefits, are employment. Basically, we are talking about making the jobs where the sun falls. In other words, if you're looking at making alcohol, you make it where the land is that produces the plant matter. Now, there's exceptions to that, especially with waste. If you're talking about the 1/3 of the banana crop that's thrown away every year, that's made somewhere else. The bananas are the bananas are a huge 5-layer bunch. The first layer is market quality. The second layer not quite long enough or pretty, but they still go to market, like in China, etc. But the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rows of bananas are too small, too ugly, whatever, and they're left to rot. And so basically that can be made into alcohol, and their minerals returned right back to the banana plantation. So, so that's an example of returning the nutrients back to the soil, but exporting energy instead of exporting oil. But of course, doing it locally is the best. The saving lives, we can talk about fossil fuel pollutants, which we will talk about. But something most people don't think about is indoor cooking, which half the world does. Half the world cooks basically over 3 rocks and a pot, and there's something burning underneath. It's dung, it's wood, it's charcoal, or it's kerosene. And that's what most of the world does for cooking, and they do it indoors. And the current figures, which are higher than you'll see in the rest of this presentation, are 4 million women and children a year die from smoke-related cooking disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, emphysema, etc. And of course, the biggest engine of deforestation is cutting wood for timber. It's cutting wood to cook your food. And that's something you can't blame people for doing, but alcohol offers a very, very elegant answer to that. Next. Here's someone bringing her week's worth of cooking fuel home. She may have walked 6 hours one way to get to where there's still wood to cut, because as people start cutting all the wood, they have to go farther and farther to get it. And so in many parts of the world, it's indeed a 6-hour trip each way for the week's worth of wood, about 100 pounds. She's got 100 pounds of wood on her back. So this is what much of the world looks like when you're talking about cooking wood deforestation. These are all very small trees. They're not cut down for timber. This whole area has been denuded just because it's in the path of where people need to go to cook. Next. You can see just a little bit of smoke coming out from under the hut here, but the Hillary Clinton recently, 2 years ago, went into one of these places in Africa, and she is choking and coughing, going, "What's going on in here?" And people said, they're just cooking their food here. So she became a real champion for ending the indoor cooking with wood, and pushed the UN to put a lot of funding into this, which we have been working with. Next. Of course, indoor cooking with fire is dangerous to kids in particular, running around playing while mom's cooking. This organization does nothing but volunteer medical help to treat kids who have been damaged or injured by indoor fires and cooking. Next. Fossil fuel, though, of course, it's used a bit for cooking, but I wanted to break you out of thinking this is about SUVs a moment ago. But of course, we're using oil in a big way for vehicles, transportation, and of course for generating electricity around the world. Fossil fuels are problematic. They're dirty, they produce enormous amounts of toxic waste, of course, global warming gases like CO2. With alcohol, we can take surpluses. Remember, surplus is what we want to return back to the system from food processing, from areas that are not being cultivated because there's no cash crop that they can be exported, but yet people need energy. Alcohol can solve issues about access to energy, health situations like refrigeration in remote areas that don't have electricity can be done with alcohol. And we can use alcohol processes, growing different crops, growing different plants that help us clean up the environment, like being able to clean up marshes, using marsh plants to get rid of sewage, and of course creating jobs and local self-reliance. Now, I hate using a bunch of text in front of you, but I want to pack in these ideas because back in the 80s, when we were working very hard on alcohol fuel, Carter had the DOE study what would be the effect of alcohol fuel on employment? And what that was turned out to be 26 million jobs would be generated in America if we made our own fuel instead of using oil. And that was at many different scales of alcohol production. Some large plants like we have in the Midwest nowadays, some medium-sized plants, and a whole lot of small plants. Because alcohol scales across a wide range of capacities. And so 26 million people would even reverse all the jobs we lost under the Bushes. You know, I mean, this would make full employment in the United States. So here are places where alcohol can get used. Of course, in transportation, you know, running vehicles, buses, everything else. In my little tiny county, almost the smallest county in California, Santa Cruz County, we use 120 million gallons of fuel a year. 120 million gallons, you know. We just found out the other day that 18,000 people drive over the hill every day, you know, to commute to their Silicon Valley jobs. That's 20 million gallons of fuel. We have a large need for fuel for transportation. And the world is not making lots more cars, it's making more trucks and buses. That's what's happening in India, in China. It's the basic infrastructure of delivery which is being increased, and alcohol can power those heavy vehicles very well. And in fact can do it with better mileage than diesel or gasoline in engines that are specifically designed to run on alcohol. Why? Alcohol is 106 octane. It's extremely high quality fuel. That means you can squeeze the fuel a great deal before it explodes, and the more you can squeeze it, the more efficient it is, and the more mileage you get. So alcohol has some huge benefits over the toxic waste byproducts that we use for fuel now. Because, you know, when oil was first processed, it was used for heating and lighting, and all the volatile stuff that was left over was flushed into rivers. Rockefeller would dispose of it at night into rivers. It's still the same today. When they make plastics and linoleum and nylon stockings and whatever, what everything that's left over is generally benzene, toluene, xylene, these super carcinogenic, volatile, you know, byproducts from the making of everything else valuable out of oil, and then they throw whatever's left over at the refinery that day together and sell it to us as gasoline. So they legally get to dispose of their toxic waste and get us to pay for it. And it's the same as it was in Rockefeller's day, where the stuff that didn't go to high value uses was used to fuel cars. So, you know, what we're talking about is toxic waste versus something specific that is good for running internal combustion engines. It's one substance, and we can engineer for that versus 400 different chemicals that are not the same on any 2 days in a refinery. So being able to engineer specifically for alcohol, we can get up to 22% better mileage than we do with diesel. And diesel gets quite a bit better mileage than gasoline. So it's, you know, it's not necessary to lose mileage when going to alcohol. Although if you just take your car on the street and run on alcohol, that was optimized for gas, you will lose 10 or 12% miles per gallon. But it's so much per mile is still better. Electrical generation. We are working around the world on this issue because a lot of places aren't like the United States. We have a grid. We take that for granted, almost like the air we breathe. But like you're in Ethiopia, 100 million plus people, no electrical grid anywhere. Everyone runs on generators. So the whole country is running on generators. In fact, 60% of Ethiopians don't live on a road. Their village is in the bush. Alcohol production can be done appropriate tech in a village right where people live with stuff they grow right there for the purpose, and they can have refrigeration for their critical medicines. They can have a little bit of electricity in the town. They can have light at night using alcohol lanterns. They can have all these things without having to build the infrastructure of a grid, and they can make electricity. So, and of course, the emissions from alcohol, from generators, from transportation, cooking, etc., are essentially pollution-free. I'm going to show you a little something here while we're talking. I'm going to put alcohol, and I'm going to put a little gasoline up here, just a little tiny bit, and we're going to burn them and show the difference in cleanliness between the two. And that has a lot to do with why we can see why alcohol is more efficient. So that's the gasoline, and that's the alcohol. So you can see when you burn gasoline, it's extremely dirty. Lots of stuff. Does not burn very completely, and I hope I don't set off the fire alarm here, but basically, let's see. Yeah, thank you. So basically, the carbon you're seeing form on the inside of the glass there is unburned parts of gasoline, and inside your engine, you have huge amounts. You have huge amounts of carbon inside the engine, which cause your engine oil to turn black. It acts like sandpaper on the inside of the engine, which wears your rings and pistons out. And
Yeah, it just went out.
yeah, it just went out.
Good timing.
So you can see that the alcohol is burning over there. It's still very faint blue flame, but you don't see any carbon forming inside the bowl with the alcohol. So the difference when you have a fuel that has a lot of unburned stuff is that stuff that's not doing work. That unburned fuel, the smoke you saw, and the soot you're seeing here, that is fuel not contributing to mileage. Alcohol burns very clean, very completely with basically, when I have my truck tested in California, which is every 2 years, I have 0 hydrocarbons, which is the soot. I have 0 carbon monoxide, which is the poisonous, gas, Dr. Kevorkian's death gas, the stuff people used to use when they go in their garage at night and turn on their car on gasoline until it would make a lot of carbon monoxide and they pass out and die. And only 4 parts per million nitrous oxides, the brown stuff in smog. Now, to give you an idea of how clean that is, my truck is allowed 400 parts per million in regards to nitrous oxide, so it's 99% pollution free. But the other 2 emissions, there's no measurable carbon monoxide or hydrocarbon, so it's infinitely cleaner than what's allowed for gasoline. So, 98, 99% pollution free is not kind of a fanciful number. It's what you actually measure the cleanliness of alcohol is compared to gasoline. And in fact, the reason why we put 10 and now 15% of alcohol in with gasoline is to clean up its emissions. That's why alcohol is added to gas.
You touched upon octane levels.
Yes.
What's the equivalent octane level for what the alcohol is?
Alcohol's 106 octane, gasoline is essentially 87, but when it comes out of the refinery, it's only 60, and then they have to add chemicals, refined chemicals to it to bring the octane up. And so that's a big difference in quality of fuel.
106 without any additional chemicals.
Without anything added to it, yes. So, yes.
I thought they put lead before, right? Lead.
Yes, it used to be alcohol was used to raise the octane, ethyl alcohol. And so ethyl gas came from ethyl alcohol added to the gasoline. And then the oil companies discovered they could use a chemical called tetraethyl lead as an octane booster. And up until the mid-70s, that was added to gasoline. And there's no known amount of measurable lead that is safe to breathe or ingest. No, it's the smallest amount we can measure causes harm. And so for 60 years, the oil companies fought having alcohol in the fuel and kept lead in the fuel until finally Congress in the 70s finally said, you're nuts, this is gone, you can't do it anymore. And so just now, it's taken since the 70s for the lead levels in our soil to actually drop significantly so it's not so dangerous anymore. But we were burning lead all over the world in our fuel, and it's in the few countries where the oil companies still have control. So alcohol is a really clean fuel. Environmentally, you saw the picture of the cycle of making alcohol, right? So plants absorb CO2 out of the air, but when you burn the alcohol made from those plants, CO2 goes back into the air. That's a cycle, okay? So the CO2 going out the exhaust of a car is what's needed to grow next year's crop of things to make alcohol. So whatever goes out is reabsorbed by the next crop. It's a stable state. In other words, it doesn't add to CO2 in the atmosphere like burning gasoline does, because when you burn that, it goes into the atmosphere. CO2 is not toxic, but it causes global warming. And so then the problem with that is that there's nothing to absorb it. There's nothing in the fuel cycle that takes the CO2 back out of the air with gasoline. Alcohol takes care of itself because the next year's plant matter absorbs CO2, mixes it with sunlight and water to make carbohydrates, which we make into alcohol. So alcohol will not add to global warming, and given the lack of addition, will go ahead and allow Earth systems to slowly, over 50 to 100 years, bring down the CO2 level back to a safe point. Next. So some people say, gosh, how can you make enough fuel? You know, solar energy is so spread out and crops are so spread out, and can we, you know, how can you make a fuel for $4 a gallon and get it to the market? You know, you guys can't do it, you're all crazy. Well, I would argue that we already make a fuel that's, you know, basically made from cellulose, plant fiber, which is also a carbohydrate, and we do it right now with mobile biodigesters, and we process that, gather it, and deliver it to the market for $4 a gallon. And most of you haven't heard of this fuel, at least not thinking about it this way, but let me show you how it's done. Here's the biomass. There's the cellulosic hay out there. Here are the mobile biodigesters. All right? They eat the hay. All right? And organisms in their guts ferment the cellulose, get the carbohydrates out where it turns into next. It turns into, of course, you know, we collect it from the cows, it becomes milk, which is a pretty good human fuel, and we actually take that, collect it a drip at a time around all the farms in the United States, and we go to, you know, aggregate it, we can deliver it to the door for $4 a gallon, and it's a cellulosic biofuel which powers people. Next time. So, making alcohol is much easier than that. We grow a crop. You were mentioning crops versus waste. So we can grow a crop. In Oregon, they used to grow a lot of beets here. You know, beets, the beets we're talking about are like 15 pounds, sugar beets or fodder beets. And they would produce 1,000 gallons an acre of alcohol if you fermented that sugar. Well, the pulp that was left over, right? That pulp left over is, well, that's where all the nutrients from the soil are. Remember, only the solar portion, the carbohydrates from the sugar, were taken out of those beets to make the fuel. All the protein, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium that's in the proteins, everything from the soil is still there in the mash that's left over. And when you feed that to dairy cows, you get much more milk per acre than you would get from corn. And you get 4 times the amount of fuel, and it comes out to twice the amount of animal feed than if you had that acre in corn. So why is that important? We're going to get to food versus fuel in a moment. And I'll do it right now, in fact, because how many people, well, watch this. This is an amazing thing. How many people here in the room, and I want a show of hands, haven't heard this anywhere, that alcohol production is going to starve people and make the price of food go up because we're using food to make fuel? Who has not heard that? Oh my God. Only a couple of people out of the whole room. Can you imagine the amount of advertising effort it takes to convince 90% of the people in the room of anything? I mean, maybe the O.J. Simpson trial got everybody kind of on the same page for a few days. But basically, from an advertising executive's point of view, the campaign that did what you just saw here, got that message to almost everybody in the room, that was amazing. And you know what it cost? $4 billion. And it was conducted by the American Petroleum Institute. So the food versus fuel argument is completely and totally fabricated. But it's so simple. It's such a great tagline. Oh, food versus fuel. It just rolls off your tongue. I'm going to explain to you why it's not true, and it's going to take 5 minutes, which is the mark of really good propaganda, is that your side can just spit it out there in 3 words, and to oppose the propaganda, you have to explain it, because we don't really get trained in agriculture in the United States, you know, as an educational thing. So first of all, do we eat corn, right? I mean, if we're talking about taking corn and making alcohol, the assumption is the corn goes into the alcohol plant and all that comes out is alcohol and the corn is destroyed. But do we eat corn? Well, out of all the corn we grow in the United States, 1% of the corn is eaten directly by people. And by directly, I mean corn chips, right? And breakfast cereal. That's how we eat corn in the United States. I mean, how many of you have sat down to a big bowl of polenta in the last month? Not a lot of hands go up, right? In other words, we don't eat corn in the United States as the main food. We eat chips and we eat cereal. So 1% of the corn goes there. Now, this is something you've all unfortunately eaten. 5% of the starch, not the whole corn, just the starch, becomes high fructose corn sweetener. And that's in about 60% of the things in the supermarket. Now, I'm going to tell you, my opinion is that that is not food. High fructose corn sweetener is an industrial chemical that's sweet, but it's nowhere near food. You know, like it's not essential. You know, nobody's starving if they don't have high fructose corn sweetener. 3% of the starch becomes modified food starch. So this shirt, when it came back from the laundry, had starch in it, right? Modified food starch is used in gunpowder. You know, it's used in thickening up salsa that's made in New York City, right? Modified food starch is an industrial product and not a food source. Now, there is 1% of corn that is used by people, and that's whiskey. And I would absolutely argue that whiskey is food, but that's just me. Now, if that's all the human uses of corn, out of all the 10 billion bushels, and a bushel is 56 pounds of corn, that's a lot of corn we produce. Where does it all go? Not to people. It goes to our animals and animals in rich countries that can afford to buy our corn to feed it to their cow. So basically it's cow food. Now, some of you would argue, some of you aren't vegetarians, even though I'm in Ashland, okay, that, you know, meat is food, so, well, you know, corn is food because cows eat it and make meat. But how many vegetarians do we have in the crowd here? Oh, quite a few. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question that most vegetarians know by heart. How many pounds of corn does it take to make a pound of cow?
20.
16.
I think that's water. How many pounds of food does it
20.
Let's get closer.
Take out the bones, take out the rumen, take
Oh.
off the head, and you buy a pound of hamburger, 20 pounds of corn went into that.
You're right, because half the cow goes to waste. So if you're looking at the whole cow, 10 pounds of corn makes 1 pound of cow. But of the meat itself, you're right, 20 pounds is correct. So it's 10 to 1 is the usual number we use. 10 pounds into 1. Now, we could feed the whole world if we just stopped eating about 10% of the meat we eat now, because we'd have 100 times the corn to feed the world. But let's just leave that alone. People are going to eat what they're going to eat. So now, so anyway, it takes 10 pounds to get 1 pound of beef. But, you know, there's this interesting thing, because you can, you know, this concept that I keep trying to promote lately is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We've all heard that 1,000 times on television shows, which is what they ask somebody to swear to when they're in court. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And we don't even think about what that means. But the truth means you can say something that's true. So for instance, the press can say 40% of all corn is diverted into alcohol plants. That's true. 40% of all corn in the United States goes to an alcohol plant. The whole truth is, but what comes out of the alcohol plant? Alcohol comes out, but also there's something called dried distiller's grains. In other words, it's not just, I mean, it's true 40% of the corn went in, and if you don't say anything else, although that's true, you would think the corn was destroyed. But the alcohol comes out, and everything that isn't a carbohydrate. And what are carbohydrates made from again? 3 things.
Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen,
Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen.
and sunlight.
Sunlight, water, carbon dioxide. Distillate water, carbon dioxide. So basically, everything that came from the soil is still there in the mash. It looks like grain still. It's all the protein and fat and everything else. And that, if you feed that to the cows, instead of the whole corn, you're only feeding 1/3 as much. Because about 2/3 of the corn is starch, right? Corn starch. So the good stuff is 1/3 of the grain of corn. So it turns out if you take the dried distillers grains, it only takes 3 1/3 pounds of dried distillers grains to get to the meat. But it's not, this is 1 pound from the raw corn, but then you go into permaculture, because there's a funny answer that's coming up here, which is, where do cows come from? Where do cows come from? Originally, where were the first cows? What part of the world did they come from? Africa. In fact, today, the measure of worth of a family is how many cows do they have? So cows originally came from southern Europe and northern Africa. Well, gosh, there are vast grasslands in these two places, right? Southern Europe, northern Africa. Northern Africa is now a desert, the Sahara, which was caused by overgrazing. It used to be a brushy, woody, savanna, and by overgrazing we made it into a desert. And southern Europe is woody, brushy. And if you look at cows compared to buffalo, you see big differences. First of all, you look at the feet. Buffalo have angled, pointed toes to punch into grassy turf and get traction, even in the snow. Cows have these big, flat feet that are important on soft forest soil, to float them on the softer soil. So cows are brushy, woody eaters, and that's where they evolved. And so here we are feeding them the grain of a grass, which is a prairie plant, and they're not evolved to eat it. Cow stomachs are pH. So what does that mean? It means it's the same acidity or alkalinity as pure water, which is not acid or alkali either way. If you go toward 1 from 7, it gets more acid. If you go toward 14 from 7, it gets more alkali. But cows are right there in the middle. They're pH neutral. So they have 4 stomachs with all these funguses and bacteria living in them to break down the cellulose into energy that they can then, use for their life. But if you feed them corn can't be broken down this way. You and I can eat corn because we have pH 2, battery acid stomachs. So we can dissolve corn and we get nutrition out of it. Cows can't. The starch goes out the cow as poop. All right? So 10 pounds go in to the cow to make 1 pound of meat. Why is it so efficient? Because 7 pounds goes out as poop. The starch goes out as poop. The only stuff that's really good for making the meat is the protein and fat. So when you feed just that to the cows instead of the starch with it, they gain 1.17 pounds of meat. So all of a sudden you're faced with the reality that not only is the propaganda convincing you of something that isn't true, the opposite is true. This is the first time you've seen a free lunch in your life. So what am I saying here? If it takes 10 pounds of corn to make 1 pound of cow, but if you take the starch out first to make the alcohol and feed the leftover to the cows, they gain more weight. You get more meat, 17% more meat if you ferment the corn than if you don't. So the answer is, if you want to feed the world, you need to ferment and distill off the alcohol from all the corn to have more reserve corn left over if you're keeping the amount of meat stable. So this is the brilliance of the American Petroleum Institute, is telling you something that's true. The corn is diverted from, directly going for cow food and into an alcohol plant. They skip over the whole truth, which is you get both alcohol and plenty of animal feed out, which actually generates more meat. And then the nothing but the truth is you actually are hurting the food supply by not making alcohol. So when you go through these arguments, whenever you hear an argument against alcohol fuel, you have to ask yourself, how am I being manipulated against my own interests? So the food versus fuel thing is completely fabricated. If you want to go on my website, alcoholcanbeagas.com, you'll hear this discussion on Science Friday, on NPR Science Friday, where they researched all my claims and went and talked with alcohol processors, farmers, other experts in animal feed, and they verified everything I'm telling you about this before they would put it on the air. So it's a completely nice 20-minute credible story. Now that you know you've been lied to about that, wow, that really opens up the whole field of what you've been lied to about when it comes to alcohol. So, for instance, alcohol will wreck your car. Well, heck, you just saw how gasoline turns the inside of your engine black with soot and makes your oil turn black and has to be changed. With alcohol, there's nothing in here. There's no leftover oil. I go up to 25,000 miles without changing my oil on alcohol fuel. And I do change the filter every so often because dirt comes into your engine from the air. But, how much oil would we save every year if we didn't have to change it every 3,000 miles because of all the carbon soot? And alcohol fuel has been studied over and over again since the 1900s and triples engine life. Do you know how much energy and water and resources go into making an engine? It's enormous. Okay? So let's go away from corn though, because I'm not arguing we should grow more corn. Corn is really stupid because when you grow massive quantities of the same thing and you look around in nature and go, wow, where can I find an example of nature with massive quantities of one crop? It doesn't exist. Nature doesn't do things that way. And in fact, monoculture, the growing of massive quantities of one crop, actually can be relieved by alcohol fuel. Because I was a farmer for 10 years, so I have the chops to talk about this. If you're a farmer in the Midwest, though, you weren't making money like I was when I was farming in Woodside, California. In the Midwest, you got a choice about what crops to grow because you can only grow what someone's going to buy. I would talk to my friends at the Ecological Farming Conference, and they go, ha, 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 we, little, vegans, farmers, or we're so smart, we grow $100,000 an acre worth of organic vegetables. And those dummies in the Midwest, they grow corn and soybeans, and they make $50 an acre, which was true up until 5 years ago. Your net profit was $50 an acre. So you had to have 1,000 acres to make a middle-class living. 1.5 square miles of corn to make $150,000 a year living. And so they would all brag about how smart they were, and I go, you guys, those are our brothers out there. Those are farmers too, and you're putting them down. I'd like to see, your little vegan butt sell 500 acres worth of arugula in St. Louis. 500 acres of arugula, I mean, that's so much. I go, that's right, there's no one to buy it, so how can you grow that, right? We can do it here with lots of small amounts of specialty crops, but you can't do it where everyone has 500 acres, right? So they can only sell three things in the Midwest at the end of the season. They can sell corn, they can sell soybeans, and they can sell corn. That's it. Who buys it? There are 4 corporations that buy that. There's ConAgra, there's ADM, there's Cargill, and there's one other I keep forgetting the name of. That's it, 4 buyers. And guess what? Long ago, these guys stopped competing. So the elevator at the end of the town, there's only one, and in this town it's owned by Cargill. In that town it's owned by ADM. And so there's no competition. You have no choice about where you sell your crop. So you bring it in there, and they take it, and 60 days later, they pay you. They don't even have to pay you right away for it, okay? So farmers have their serfs. So and so they have to grow corn and soybeans. That's monoculture. That means you need pesticides, you need herbicides. You're beholden to Roundup. You're beholden to the chemical fertilizer companies, which are the oil companies. And farmers all know this. Well, there's a big myth out there that farmers get subsidies to grow corn, and they do not. They get subsidies to compensate them for sitting out the season because there's not enough market for all the corn we could grow. And so you can't let farmers be free market or you starve, right? Oh, this year there was a bumper crop. Like this year was the record year of corn production ever in the United States. Record of all time. And we've had 6 of the top years out of the last 7 years. So the point is, if you have too much of a crop, this is the scenario in farming. There's the year where everyone does great. You have mountains of corn, and you all lose money because supply and demand. There's too much corn for the market, and you all go broke. Then there's the year where the weather's terrible for everybody, and then you don't have anything to sell, and you all go broke. And then there's the year in between, and this is the insidious year, where you do well, but your neighbor does poorly. And that's the year you make money. Because you have crop, they don't, and they're paying a lot. Do you know how corrosive that is to community? That's horrible, right? Because now you don't have a free flow of information with your neighbors because, really you only make money when they do bad. So this is the insidious part of monoculture agriculture, is that it tears apart community. Now, here you are, you come into town with an alcohol plant, there's the elevator at the end of the town, and then there's the alcohol plant. And you in the alcohol plant say, I have a contract I'd like to fill. Would someone like to grow 1,000 acres of beets for me? Would someone like to grow 1,000 acres of sorghum for me? Would someone like to grow 1,000 acres of Jerusalem artichoke for me? And so suddenly farmers have a choice about what to grow. They don't have to grow corn or beans anymore. Because you're the new buyer in town, and this is what big agriculture and the oil companies are terrified of. Because if farmers can grow a wide variety of crops and there's not monoculture, they don't all need fertilizer anymore. Because when you crop rotate, crops use different amounts of different nutrients every year. You don't have, if you have a problem with corn borers and, the things spread out of the ground from their little larvae, and here, corn borer comes up and he looks around and goes, what the hell are all these beets doing here? I don't eat these, right? And so the nematodes the next year that would go after the beets, well, you got sorghum growing all, gnarly roots, and the nematodes go, I can't eat these roots. And so by rotating your crops, you eliminate the need for pesticides, herbicides, and most chemical fertilizer. And that is an incredibly powerful set of interests that wants to keep farming the way it is. So if you start growing, if you have a plant in a small town, this is part of your discussion about what happens with crops, is that now you've got someone else that's competing with the granary at the end of town from Archer Daniels Midland to buy your crop. And believe me, farmers desperately want someone else to buy their crop and not have to be railroaded into the same row as everyone else, because farmers are farmers. They're not corn farmers or soybean farmers, they're farmers. So what can they grow instead? Let's look at this one. This would really work well in Oregon, cattails. Now, you've all seen these, right? When you see them flower, it's like a stick with a hot dog on top, this thing here. Well, these things live in marshes, suspended water, where they don't have to compete with weeds. No herbicides needed. Weeds can't grow where there's standing water. But the cattails can, and this is in a sewage treatment plant in Arcata, California, where I first did this. And we just pulled out the cattails to make alcohol with them, and this is what they look like. They have rhizomes, see, that go horizontally. Here's two rhizomes going horizontally, and these white rhizomes are loaded with starch, and this whole part of the base of the plant is loaded with starch. And then these are the roots that bring in the nutrients. Now, if you grow them in sewage, and here's a rhizome going this way and then sprouting up a new cattail. So these plants produce a huge amount of starch, just like corn does. And, basically you're talking about, instead of 300 gallons per acre, which is, corn, you're looking at 7,500 gallons per acre from cattails. So that's a big difference, and you can use it to process sewage in a small community that can't afford, millions of dollars for a sewage treatment plant. We were in Clarksville, Missouri. They got hit by the EPA for not just having a holding pond and dumping it into the Mississippi. They had to do something new. It was going to cost them $3 million. You only had 500 people living there. We looked at another town that had 5,000 people, and the EPA regulations wanted them to go $12 million for a sewage treatment plant before they could dump it in the creek. which they had been dumping into the creek with a really basic sewage treatment plant that would fit in this room. So, you know, the only thing better than military contracting is disposing of poop. People will pay anything to get rid of poop. You know, and that's the whole sewage treatment industry. Now, cattails, you know, Arcata is a town of 7,000. They had to upgrade 20 years ago. So we put in a cattail marsh to take the primary treated sewage, and it dropped the nitrate level, you know, which is, you know, the basic measure of toxicity of sewage, 75 milligrams per liter. Don't worry about what that means. The comparison is when we were done with running that sewage through the cattails was 5 milligrams per liter, which was the same level of nitrates coming out of Six Rivers National Forest into the town. So this was clean, clean, clean water when it comes to nitrogen. And cattails used that nitrogen to grow and fix all that starch from the air, carbon dioxide, water, right? And sunlight. They use that nitrogen to make this happen. And look at how much bigger the cattail is on the right. It's 3 times heavier than one grown in a natural marsh. You can use this to process dairy waste, cow waste, chicken waste, and of course human waste. Keep going, Tom. This is not marijuana. I know some of you might get confused here, but this is cassava. Okay, so this is a tropical plant. Makes a huge starchy root, which is this next shot. You can see this huge thing is all full of starch. People eat it as a low-cost calorie thing, but almost everywhere that grows cassava, they have to be careful not to grow too much because all the farmers, if they grew too much, what would happen? The price would crash because there'd be too much cassava for the people to eat. We were in Mazan on the Amazon, a town called Mazan, 3,000 people, and we were talking about making alcohol, and they said, oh, we could grow more cassava. I go, well, you have a lot of land, why don't you grow no more now? Because my neighbors would kill me if I grew more cassava. We all grow just enough so that we can all make enough money to live, but if anybody grew more, it would just crash the price and we'd all be screwed. But if there's more market, if we're making fuel for the town, because there's no power, there's no grid, there's no generation of electricity to Mazan, people have little generators to charge their cell phones and run their TVs, you know, even out in the middle of the Amazon, people have TV and cell phones, yes.
Why the difference between U.S. cassava and Brazilian cassava in your book, the production amount?
In the United States, they're taken care of differently, and in Brazil, they're like given no fertilizer, no irrigation, and no anything. But actually, nowadays, those numbers come much closer together. People have learned how to grow cassava expertly all over the world. So this is a crop will grow in the worst possible soil you can imagine with no care, and it makes a tree-shaped thing with lots of biomass to return to the soil. And, you know, it's 700-800 gallons an acre with no care.
And it uses very little water.
Oh, yeah, you can be in a really droughty place. They grow in Arizona, you know. Next. That's not cassava. That is one heck of a big beet. Okay? This one is similar to sugar beets grown up here in the north, which is a cold climate crop. This one's actually a variety that works in the tropics. So it gives a rotation to other crops like, you know, that are finished, and then you can grow this instead. This again is a 1,000 gallon per acre crop, just like it would be in the United States. Next. Sugar cane, or you know, in this case, it's sugar cane. It's nowadays you can get upwards of 800 or 900 gallons an acre from sugar cane. Sugar cane is good because you plant it once and you harvest it for 10 years. It's a perennial. It comes up over and over again, and this provides more employment in most parts of the world than almost anything else. Sugar cane. And long term, like in Brazil, people work for 10 months a year, you know, migrating with the sugar cane, where other crops, you might only work 2 or 3 months and then you're out of work, you know, like picking grapes in Northern California. It's all about 6 weeks and you're done. But sugar cane is a continuous crop and provide the largest union in Brazil, over 1 million members, is the Sugar Cane Workers Union. So it's an important engine around the world, and now Brazil is the first country in the world to not import any oil whatsoever for transportation. Not a single barrel is used to run cars in Brazil. They have some of their own oil, that, they use that for diesel fuel primarily. But most, every car in Brazil runs on alcohol. If they didn't before, they have a kit like this one installed on the car. This is our kit, but ones like it are sold in Brazil. And this plugs in to the fuel injectors on the car, and this is a little computer, and that's all that's necessary to make a car able to run on both alcohol and gasoline. That's it.
Is
$300
that-
to $400.
Is that just to alert it of the different air mixture
It-
ratios?
That's right. The difference between alcohol and gasoline is that they use a different amount of oxygen. And so your car's computer sniffs the exhaust. It goes, oh, there's too much oxygen in the exhaust. And so the fuel injection system squirts a little more fuel to balance that out. And then, oh, there's too little oxygen in the exhaust, so that it squirts a little less. And it makes the adjustment 50 times a second. So it's all about sniffing the exhaust. But with alcohol, since there's oxygen in the fuel, that would be thrown off. And so this makes the adjustment between the two fuels. So it's a very simple device, and basically it's foolproof, and they have hundreds of thousands of these around Brazil for older cars that weren't made at the factory to run on both alcohol and gas. And guess what? We've been making those cars in the United States since 1994. And none of you, or almost none of you, have even heard about it. There are many millions of flex fuel cars on the road that are being made that way because of a deal that the EPA made with the car companies to start producing them, even though there weren't enough stations yet to fuel them. So they can run on gas, but they can also run on alcohol. Now, if you go to a car dealer and say, well, what's the difference between a flex fuel car, one that actually runs on alcohol and gas, and a normal car? And the car salesman say, oh, it can run on premium and regular.
No.
They have no idea that alcohol was why they were produced. You know? So people have them and don't know it. And Tom and I have had people come up to us and go, wow, I have a flex fuel car. Can I run it on alcohol after a talk like this? And go, yeah, you don't need this kit. It's already built into your car. Tom and I filmed the entire assembly of Ford trucks in
Dearborn.
at the Rouge plant in, that Ford assembles these things at. They make almost 1,000 trucks a day. And we filmed it right from the gas tank all the way to the cab, each part as they installed it. And we said, all right, well, you've got F-150s, 250s, and 350s. We see those bins for the different size engines, like fuel pumps, We go, where's the one for the flex fuel? And they go, what are you talking about? There's just these three. There's no flex fuel pump. Well, but they say it'll wreck the fuel pump if you put alcohol in it. This is all we installed. We go to the next thing. Well, oh my God, where's the stainless steel fuel lines that are supposed to be in the front? Because alcohol's supposed to eat up the fuel lines. He goes, there's F-150, 250, and 350. Those are the three bins. That's it. What about the fuel tank? Isn't, they say alcohol will melt the plastic and your tank will leak. And he goes, I have 3 tanks here and there's nothing for fuel. So we get to the end of the assembly line and we go, what's the difference? And the guy who's giving us the tour says, it's software. We have some additional data in the computer that tells us more air-fuel mixtures than is in the normal computer. It costs us, when you figure out the development time, it costs us maybe $50 a vehicle to have flex fuel cars instead of normal cars. And of course, it drops to zero after they've recovered their costs on the engineering. So we've been making them since '94, and no one tells you that this is true. Yes.
What
We keep
percent? What
advertising, but I didn't know what it meant.
what percentage?
Oh, well, yeah, that's the thing. If you don't know what an ad is about, that's a really bad ad. Yes.
What percentage of vehicles are flex fuel these days?
Oh, it's still a small percentage of the total United States fleet, but it's,
Although Ford and GM both.
Oh, yeah, well, back during the bailouts,
Yeah.
part of the deal was Ford and GM said they would make half their vehicles run on alcohol by 2 years later, and both of them hit their targets. Both of them did what they said they were going to do,
Oh.
without incentives.
And I Google it.
I just,
10 million cars in America.
There you go, 10 million.
So why isn't anyone, there's no alcohol available?
Yes, there is. There is alcohol available. There are 2,000 stations around the United
it's
States.
in every gallon of unleaded fuel you buy. Actually, there's
Right, but
10% is
Is alcohol.
is ethanol. in
But-
every,
but
in
that's
every
not gonna
gallon of gas.
change over to-
No, that's right. We think that's a good waste of alcohol, putting that funky gasoline. So there are 2,000 stations in the United States that sell 85% alcohol at the pump, called E85. And they all say on it, oh, don't put this in your car unless you're a flex fuel vehicle. But I'm here to tell you today that the University of Minnesota at Mankato studied this for 7 years. The EPA studied it for 3 years. And they recently came out with a statement that said that every vehicle on the road since about 1983 can use 30% alcohol without any modifications whatsoever.
And that's including diesel?
No, all
No, not
gasoline
diesel.
vehicles. We'll get to diesels in a minute. So the point is that your car out there today will run on, according to the EPA, 30% alcohol without this kit. Okay? They say there's no reason why all the fuel in the United States should have less than 30% alcohol in it. We should not be selling straight gas anymore. That came out just a few months ago. Of course, there's a little distance between they're saying this is our stated policy that we're going to, and then when they actually do it, the oil companies are fighting tooth and nail right now to try to discourage the EPA, because the EPA doesn't need Congress's approval. They can just sign it into law, and everybody's got to do it. Now, EPA has been suing the EPA over and over again to try to stop them from doing this. But as more people know that this is what the policy of the EPA is, and the American Petroleum Institute recently lost in the Supreme Court a lawsuit that said the EPA couldn't raise the amount of alcohol in fuel to 15%. And the Supreme Court said, look, you guys, we generally like big business, but this is the United States government. We make the laws, and you have to follow them. So buzz off. People can put whatever they want in their tanks. This was a huge landmark decision which got no press whatsoever. What was the other thing on the day that some other spectacular thing that was like,
Well, the Arkansas,
there was some stupid news thing from the Supreme Court that day that would have been great on Entertainment Tonight, but this thing, which talks about the future of the planet, didn't make the press. Because 30% is all we get. 30% of our fuel in the United States is all we get from the Arabian countries. So if we went to E30 in the United States, we would need exactly 0 barrels of oil from the Persian Gulf. 0 barrels. And that would mean hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of military costs could be avoided, because we could just tell those countries, we're glad you have oil, we hope you like drinking it, because we're not buying it anymore. And we're pulling everyone out. We could do that literally right now.
then you're losing all those jobs in the military.
You mean you're losing all those military expenditures that drain our treasury with no practical benefit to anyone?
In the name of war.
Well,
You
that's
have the
thing about
jobs on the
military budget.
environmental
It-
side,
It
though.
spends money and destroys the money. It just destroys money. Nothing comes out of military expenditures. There's no product.
Just a new debt ceiling.
There's the feeling of security.
If
Oh,
you-
I feel so much better, spending $500 million a year on having guys do exercises in the Gulf and, whatever, try to protect our oil that happens to be under their sand. Yes.
I just had a comment on using the ethanol fuel on outboard motors,
Yes.
because,
Lots of bad PR about that.
well, I just moved here from a place where we use boats a lot, and countless number of stories of
Yes.
people, including us, with our outboard motors,
Right.
getting fouled. Fundamental difference with the ethanol fuel and the alcohol fuel.
All right,
We
well,
notice it. So
I have a
what-
boat too.
How do you reconcile that, like personal testimony, where other fishermen have?
Oh, it's well publicized, and guess what? Those stories go on for about 3 or 4 months, and they disappear. Because,
Is it just different motor mechanisms?
no, it's very clear. Remember what I told you gasoline was? It's all the byproducts left over at the refinery at the end of the day, a lot of volatile stuff. Well, I talked to a quality control executive at Exxon, and he said, gasoline, if it's not sold in 30 days at a station, we go there in the middle of the night, we take it back and give them fresh gas. Because the evaporative stuff, the benzene, toluene, and xylene evaporates away, leaving this goo that's left over that won't run a car. It's all the tar and varnish that we dispose of
Right.
in the gasoline. So it's got to be fresh or it's no good. Well, boats, people might use them, I mean, active fishermen, that's one thing, but they're not using gasoline anyway, they're using diesel, most of the real fishermen. But pleasure boaters, who this myth is propagated around, maybe use their boat once a month, on average, maybe twice a year. And so the gasoline that's in their tank evaporates all the volatile stuff out, and that goo is in the bottom, and so they look and see how much fuel they have. Well, they go fill up again, and they get a bunch of new volatile stuff, right? But when you put alcohol in the new gas, it dissolves the tar and varnish that's on the inside of the tank from the gasoline. It's not from the alcohol. It dissolves the stuff on the inside, and then it fouls your carburetor. Okay? So it's not the alcohol that's causing the problem. It's a cleansing crisis in the circulatory system. But the oil companies...
I'm saying that's why there's resistance among those users, because
the
they're
oil
having a cleansing
companies are
crisis.
experts at seizing that, saying, we'll replace the fuel of any boater that uses that 10% alcohol stuff. We're so sorry that the state made that happen. And, what they know is that over 2 or 3 months, everybody will suddenly have no more problems. They'll change their fuel filters, and it's over. So if you want to go, now here's the thing, if you want to go to alcohol in your car, 50%, without any changes whatsoever, you don't do it all at once, you'd have a cleansing crisis, right? Like those of us who fast or whatever, we know about cleansing crisis. So the point is, the way you shift over, if you have an old car, because your whole inside of your fuel system is coated with tar and varnish, and so if you go to 50% alcohol all at once, it'll wash all that off and plug your fuel filter, and then you'll have to replace it. And people go, oh, you damaged my car. No, replacing a fuel filter is maintenance, okay? It's not damage. But you can avoid that. The first tank, you put in 1 gallon of alcohol, or E85, whatever you can buy at the pump. The second tank you put in 2. The third tank you put in 3. So you slowly increase the amount of alcohol, and it keeps washing without making big chunks come off the side of the walls of the tank, the surface of the tar and varnish, and it just burns, with the rest of the fuel. So if you do it that way, which we detail in the book and we tell people on the air, you can go from up to 50-50 alcohol with no changes to your car whatsoever. No changes. But to avoid fuel filter changes, you do it slowly to wash the whole inside of your fuel system out. But you could do it cold turkey and be ready to just, change filters. Let me keep going here. Next question.
A new car, you wouldn't have?
No problems. No problems. And lots of new cars are flex fuel, or the computers are smart enough where they, even though they don't call them flex fuel, will run on pure alcohol without any changes. Question.
Just the list there, we only have 25 minutes.
Yeah, okay. GMOs versus non-GMOs, okay? Archer Daniels Midland, which a lot of people equate with the evils like Monsanto. Guess what? Archer Daniels Midland buys no GMO corn whatsoever. Not a single kernel. They pioneered probes that they drag through rail cars full of corn that sense that's an optical reflection of from the GMO corn, and they can say, oh, the alarm went off, send that rail car back to wherever it came from, we won't use it. Because Archer Daniels Midland is the 4th largest grain company. It's not one of the top 3, and so they have to be more clever in their marketing, and almost everything they make from corn is marketed to Europe, where GMOs are not allowed. So Archer Daniels Midland has 200 products they make from their corn. Everything from vitamin C to phytoestrogens to all this stuff, and all of it has to be non-GMO to sell in Europe. And that's their policy. Now, if you go to it's sort of paradoxical for me, because let's say you want to buy alcohol for a local station. Do you go to Archer Daniels Midland and get your fuel because there's no GMOs? Or do you go to a farmer-owned co-op who's using GMO corn, but it's farmer-owned? And which value do you want to support when you buy your alcohol for your station? It gets a little sticky. The best thing is to make your own alcohol locally, and you avoid all that. If you haven't been following it, Monsanto is losing lawsuit after lawsuit, and the days when they can enforce their patents are very much numbered at this point. So this whole GMO thing, yes. I'll tell you very quickly my contribution to that, which is my patent to destroy Monsanto. I only own one patent. Not a big fan of patents, but I went and got one because I didn't want Monsanto to go ahead and patent it, then people couldn't use it. So what I did is in terms of weeds and all this stuff, so basically I was down in Latin America. I've been there, I've lived there for a year at a time, and people eat corn there. It's not like here. And the thing is, I would watch how corn would grow there. You know, corn, when it grows, the ears dry out, the whole plant dries out, and then there's a phenomenon where an abscission layer forms in the bottom of the stalk. It gets soft, and then the whole stalk falls over. So the corn is sitting on the ground. So the bottom is against the ground, but the top, the crows and everything else can get to, and they peck at it, and they scatter out corn in all directions, but the bottom kernels stay there, and then in the spring, when the rain comes, it comes up in a clump. Well, people who live in Latin America learned that was the right way to grow corn, in clumps, by observing nature. But what I observed, which was so amazing, which is in the radius around the clump of corn, there were no weeds. No weeds. As an ecologist, that jumps out at me, you know. Wow, what caused that? So I studied it and figured out what it was, and after I patented it, I called the USDA and said, what do you think of this? And they go, yeah, we've looked at that too, and we think that it's all the nitrogen that's in the corn, you know, it enriches the soil all around and gets the nitrogen so high that it poisons the weeds. And I see here a lot of people laughing. I was a farmer, and I got to tell you, the thing that uses nitrogen best are the weeds, okay? So, but the USDA is like completely focused on this war with nature mentality, and so they said it had to poison the weeds somehow. That's their only paradigm that they can deal with, war with nature. And what I discovered was when you have little bits of corn or dried distiller's grains, just the leftover for making alcohol, and you spread that on the ground in about the same concentration that would be there if the corn was just spread on the ground. That all kinds of things in the soil that eat roots have a population explosion. And so when a weed seed blows in after you've put dried distiller's grains on the ground, and the weed tries to sprout, there's all these things in there going, and eating the root right off the weed. And it's a biological weed control. It's not a chemical herbicide. So the other thing is, remember, what's left in the dried distiller's grains after you take the carbohydrates out? What's left? Protein.
Minerals.
What? Minerals, which ones?
The ones that are used to grow.
The ones to grow the next crop, right? In essence, you have this year's crop in the distiller's grains, exactly the amount of fertilizer you need to grow next year's crop. If you spread that on the ground as an herbicide, right, to kill the weeds, it also has all the fertilizer you need to grow the next crop of corn. And so now you don't need chemical fertilizer, and you don't need herbicide, and you don't need Roundup Ready seeds.
Does that
Those are the three biggest costs in growing corn. You make more profit if you do that.
Does that feed into the whole thing that you're saying that it's $1 a gallon you can produce per
No,
gallon?
that's separate. That's a whole separate calculation. I'm talking about the patent to destroy Monsanto.
Right.
So the point is, if you don't need Roundup Ready seeds, you don't need Roundup, you don't need Monsanto. And so here's my license agreement to use my patent. If you're a small farmer and you want to use my patent to make alcohol and put the stuff back out there in the field, my license agreement is $1. But, there's a but, you can't buy anything from Monsanto that year, or you have to pay full price for my patent.
Aw, good on. Good.
You got that? $1, and you can't buy anything from Monsanto if you use my patent.
How
So my
much, and how much is your full price?
The full price would be like $200, right? You know, in other words, I don't want you to use anything from Monsanto. So I announced this at the American Corn Growers Association conference. This one 80-year-old guy gets up in the front, you know, he comes up to the microphone and he pulls out $5 and said, "Can we have a group license?" Because there's nobody who hates Monsanto like a farmer. We may think they're evil, but the real victims are the farmers. They're the ones made into serfs here, you know. So anyway, alcohol fuel can reverse Monsanto's fortunes by getting rid of the market, the biggest market for its crop, for product, which is corn growing. But you want to know something? The second biggest crop in the United States, and it's the biggest irrigated crop in the United States. Do you know what that is? Biggest irrigated, because corn is not irrigated.
Long.
Lawns. Lawns are 30 million acres. Corn is 70 million acres. But 30 million acres of lawn have weed and feed thrown on them every year. So our patent would allow a local alcohol producer making alcohol from corn, because when you buy our plant, we give you a license. You can take the byproduct and sell it to people in your community to spread on the lawn. And it kills the weeds, and it fertilizes the lawn, and no chemicals are involved. Because what happens when you put weed and feed on your lawn? Well, your dog walks through the lawn and comes in the house, and now it's all on your carpet. Now your kids are climbing across the carpet, and now they're poisoned by Roundup. Roundup is the most common pesticide poisoning in the United States. 40% of all reported poisonings are from Roundup. Okay, so this is a way of getting rid of their entire market, not just on lawns, but on roadsides. Because you may not be aware of this, or you might be aware of this, that Monsanto sprays thousands and thousands of roadsides in your counties every year because they say weeds are a hazard to motorists. And you could spread this stuff instead and get rid of the weeds. So, again, if you used corn, you would be putting the nutrients back in the earth and getting rid of Monsanto's Roundup.
And they spray the cattails with Roundup at the side of the road.
And that's completely illegal because Roundup doesn't break down when it's in water. It'll go miles killing all the amphibians, and it's totally against the label to spray anywhere near a drainage ditch. And yet people do it. I've turned in several counties to the EPA for spraying off label. They were like hit with $50,000 fines. You know, because see, I'm an ecologist, right? So I go, herbicides make the need for pesticides. So you spray the Roundup by the side of the road, rain comes, it goes down the ditch, it goes down into the creek, it kills all the toads all the way down the river, and now the toads that in the spring would hop out into your yard and eat all your bugs, they're all dead now. So now you need pesticides in your garden. So herbicides made you need pesticides by disrupting the ecology. So, you know, the thing about alcohol fuels, it sews up so many problems. Now, like heating, Clarksville, Missouri, all the chemical companies that used to hire the people who live there, 500 people, they're all on welfare now. Like 65% of the town is on welfare. They can't afford propane to heat their home in Missouri in the winter. Well, there's this one businesswoman there who's one of our investors in our still company. She's, she's going to be making alcohol there, and she's going to do it with cattails from the local sewage treatment plant, which we consulted on. And she'll be able to sell that alcohol to people living in town to heat their homes in the winter at a much lower price than they would be paying for fuel oil, because they're an hour and a half from St. Louis, which is the closest, depot to ship fuel oil from. People have to drive 10 miles to get to a gas station. So she's already put in an alcohol station there. She's going to start selling alcohol to people who live there too. So, you can make a big effect by going to alcohol in heating and cooking in rural America. You don't have to go to the Amazon to make an effect. You can do it right here. What weeds? Well, you saw some of them, like cattails are considered a weed. There's...
I wanted to ask you about the cattails. Are they using the older rhizomes and the green part of the cattail, or just
They're using the rhizomes and the base of the stalk, because rhizomes are actually part of the stalk.
Okay, so
they're
it's
not
contiguous,
roots.
they're not separate.
Yeah, no, the stalk goes down into the mud, and then the rhizomes go out horizontal, and then the roots go down from that.
Right.
So
are they having to go through and pick the biggest ones and leave the small ones behind so that they continue?
You don't have a choice. You harvest all you can, and every little bit that's left in the marsh sprouts.
Oh, okay.
So you don't ever deplete them. It's not a problem. So, and we're doing a whole bunch of pioneering work to make it easy for the small-scale producer to make alcohol from cattails. Waste versus crops. Okay, over 1 billion tons of food are wasted, you might say, in the United States prior to it getting to your house. In other words, the food processing waste. You see those little baby carrots, right, that you buy in the store? They've all been tumbled to remove the skin and make that shape. And all that carrot pulp is about 8% sugar, and all that can be made in alcohol. And there's mountains of that where there's carrots. Almonds, where we are in California, just like walnuts, there's a soft husk on the outside, which is 35% sugar, which they throw away. In Mexico, we're dealing with agave growers who, 7 years ago, there was a spike in tequila drinking. And what happens when farmers see a good market? Somebody tell me.
Everybody grows it.
Everybody plants it because, oh, that must be a good market. Well, it takes 7 years before you harvest the agave. So for 7 years, everybody planted lots of agave. And now that it's the 7th year, what happens is the next year, the agave sends off this 40-foot stalk, and all the sugar in the plant goes up into it, and you lose any value, right? So it's 7 years till it flowers. Well, here they are saying, let's see, how much agave do we have and how much tequila can we sell? Oh my God, we have way more agave than there are tequila drinkers. We better convince the Chinese to drink tequila. It's not going well, okay? The Chinese are not buying this one. And so the agave farmers are coming to us saying, oh my God, we're going to lose all of our crop because all this stuff's going to flower, and we don't have any way of selling the tequila. So this is a way of converting all that massive amount of sugar, 1,000 gallons an acre per year. They get 6,000 gallons in the 6th year in the desert without water or fertilizer. We're not talking farmland now, right? We're talking desert, and this is a plant that is adapted to the desert. So when it comes to weeds and what to grow, you can grow agave with mesquite. Mesquite's a nitrogen-fixing tree that grows all over the Southwest. It grows on 70 million acres of land, which is equal to the amount of corn growing in the United States. This is a weed, okay? The pods that hang down are 35% sugar. Underneath that, you can grow buffalo gourd. It looks a little bit like the cassava we saw. It has huge, big, starchy roots and covers the ground with 900 leaves and in a big space as big as the corner of this room, and all that solar energy is funneled into the root, made into starch. And then you can grow prickly pear cactus right next to the trees. You can grow all these three things together, and guess what? They grow together in nature. These are what are already this. You just organize it for easy cultivation and harvest, and now you're talking about 2,000-3,000 gallons of fuel an acre in the desert. Okay, so what I'm saying is every climate has a collection of crops that will grow well in that climate and make a profit and make fuel for local people.
What's the water estimates for those products?
Like how much water does it take to make alcohol? This is a big myth that's out there. The oil companies say, it takes 2,500 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of alcohol. This is criminal.
It would be.
They're talking about the rain in the Midwest. The rain that falls on the corn crops, they're counting that to come up with this number. So what's the processing amount of water? Because the rain would fall on the ground whether or not you grew corn. Doesn't make any difference, right? 99% of the corn in the United States is unirrigated. So you're not using water to grow corn. It's just growing what the rain provides. So it takes 20 gallons of water in an oil refinery to make 1 gallon of gasoline. There's all kinds of water needed chemically to combine with different components of oil to make the products, and then you get the gasoline. It takes 3 gallons of water, and it's going down toward 2.5 gallons of water to make a gallon of alcohol. But the water that comes out of the plant can be used right next door for farming. And in a small scale plant, there's no wastewater because we don't dry the animal feed. See, that's where most of the energy goes and the steam goes from an alcohol plant, is that dried distiller's grain has to be dried in a big plant so they can bag it up and sell it far away. But if you have a small plant, you sell it wet to the local farmers right around you, and you don't dry it at all. You cut half the energy needed to run the alcohol plant by localizing instead of making too big a plant. Question?
Wow.
So are you proposing then that people can make these plants locally and start make what's needed for the local use?
Well, I wrote this book, okay, because people kept calling me up saying, Dave, I want to make alcohol in my local community. And I said, okay, it's time to write the book again. And so I wrote this book. It took me 4 years, and this answers all those questions. And it tells you how to build an alcohol plant. And guess what? In the 25 years since the first time I wrote this book, in conjunction with my PBS television series, which I'll tell you about in a minute, America's changed. People are freaking useless nowadays. Back when I did this 25 years ago, people would take the instructions I gave them on my workshop, and I taught 7,500 people in 170 workshops all across the country, and people went right out, got out their welding torches, got out, found old tanks on the farm, started building stills. Got pictures of a whole bunch of my student stills in here. Nowadays, people go, wow, I really want to do a green business, you know? But can you make the still for me? I'm happy to run it, but you know, I don't know how to get anything built anymore. I'm a software writer, and I'm out of work, you know? I mean, the country is not the same as it was. And all the farmers are 75, 80 years old, and they're going, I'm too old to start another business. Maybe you get my son involved. And the son goes, well, I just got out of UC Davis. I learned everything I need to know about agricultural economics, but I don't know how to weld. You know?
Or farm, for that matter.
Or farm. So anyway, things have changed. And so now we've started, I waited 2 years for someone to come along and start building stills. I wasn't going to do that job. I wrote the book. All right, I've done enough. No one did it. So, and it's true that what I know would build a very different still than what you'd have nowadays. And so one of the reasons why we're running around right now is we're trying to finish the capitalization of our still building company, which is called Blume Distillation. I figured the best way to make sure that a product is high quality is name it after yourself, because if you screw up, everybody knows where to find the guy who did it. You know. So basically, this is not our still. This is not our grandpappy still what we're designing. Back in the 80s, the still I built and is in the book looks like this. If Tom will shift over to the next slide. Technology. What can you
just
say?
had a meltdown.
Arrow key.
Oh yes, Bill Gates and his wonderful technology. So anyway, the next slide was the Liberator 925. That's it. When I built these early in the 80s before the crash in oil prices, which actually was part of defeating the Soviet Union. Back then I thought, oh, the oil companies are out to get us, you know, alternative energy guys, and we were just collateral damage, because what Bush the Senior had figured out was that the Soviet Union only had one way of getting dollars, that was selling oil. The Saudis to overproduce oil, drop the price of oil to $10 a barrel in the middle of the 90s, early 90s, late 80s, and it just, you know, destroyed the Soviet Union's ability to get capital, and it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union, because if you can't get dollars to buy spare parts for things, everything starts breaking. It was the way we won the Cold War was by dropping the price of oil, because they were dependent on that money. So those of us who were doing things like this got swept up in that. Solar panel manufacturers, everybody doing alternative energy from the Carter era, we all got wiped out. Anyway, I used to build these. Now this is what we're building. It's not your grandpappy still. So this is all containerized. It's in the same footprint as an ocean-going shipping container. We can ship these anywhere in the world. We're going to drop one into the middle of the Amazon. The Peruvian military has already told us they'll use military helicopters to drop our stills into the middle of the jungle, because they don't want the Amazon trees cut down either. And the people in the Amazon, the only way they can make money is by cutting down these big trees, for which they use the money to buy $20 a gallon gasoline. So they need the gasoline for their generators, for their boats, and that's why they cut down big trees, to get money for fuel. So when I gave a talk to 80 farmers in the Amazon, they do remember how to weld things. They thought, oh, we'll get right out there and we'll build this thing. And yeah, they're doing it. But you know, the guy we're working with in the Amazon, he's helping the people there who want to they want to export medicines from plants in the Amazon, and they need, you know, organic alcohol to do that with, you know, to do tinctures. So they're going to put this out in the middle of the jungle and use it for fuel and for making exportable medicine. And the people living there will make a good living doing it, you know, because otherwise What are they gonna do? They clear the Amazon, sell a few trees, and then run cattle for a few years until the soil washes away. Get 9 feet of rain every year in the Amazon. Soil doesn't last if it's not covered by trees. So
If you're
anyway,
cutting down the trees, they won't have rain.
well, there's that too. So anyway, this is what we're building nowadays, which is quite a bit more sophisticated, but something this size with a few tanks could make 250,000 gallons of fuel a year. And it would fit in the front of this room, the whole plant. You know, that thing plus the tanks and stuff. So 250,000 gallons of fuel would be enough to provide cooking fuel for 1,000 people. Instead of wood cooking, they could use alcohol in a stove like this to cook in Africa, in the Amazon, whatever, and that's where a lot of our business is going. But right now, we're working out a deal in, I'm just looking at the list, there's a few things I want to still get to. We're working out a deal right now with a big company that has lots of capital, and you know, basically we're going to take that capital and we're going to put in, where we are in Watsonville, a 2 million gallon per year plant, which would take up this entire room, plus the hallway, and we would, this is where our,
Did you say Vacaville?
no,
Watsonville.
Watsonville, south of Santa Cruz. So we're going to put in 2 above-ground alcohol stations, prefabricated alcohol stations that we'll build. And we're going to make the alcohol and we're going to sell it locally. So the investor is putting in the money, they get back a percentage of the revenue, and we get a percentage of the revenue. So basically, we're doing a few of these joint ventures so that we can get money together for what we really want to do, which is fund cooperatives in communities to own their own plant and their own station, because for a few $100s each, people could be members of their own station and fuel and not sell it at a profit, sell it at just above the cost of production. So now you're talking about $1 or $2 max a gallon, depending on what the crop is, and then you get the tax credits. Because our plants make what are called advanced biofuels. In other words, not corn, alcohol. And we're one of the few plants that are, well, in the world that make them, because it's flexible. It makes all these different feedstocks into alcohol. And so you get $1 reimbursement from the government for every gallon you make. But you might make the alcohol for less than $1 a gallon. You still get $1 back. And then, because there's a carbon trading scheme that the oil companies have to deal with because of the mandate for renewable fuel in the gas, they have to pay 50 cents to $1.50, depending on what the bid is, for the renewable identification number credits from the alcohol you make. So I can sell alcohol to Tom here in Watsonville. I still have the credit that I can sell to the oil companies for another 50 cents to $1, and I get $1 in tax credit, reimbursable as cash from the IRS. That's $2. It's not going to cost me even $2 to make the alcohol. So the profit you can make in a small business is really great. And these credits, they're not going away. The oil companies are using these credits, and so they need them, you know. So not only can you make the alcohol for $1 a gallon or less if you use a waste product. I mean, we're going to be using Martinelli apple cider pulp left over after making juice, because Martinelli thinks we're the greatest thing he's ever seen, and so we're going to take his pulp and make alcohol with it. And then we're going to sell it into the, you know, as well as at the above ground stations. The school district wants us to power their diesel buses by swapping out the engines for high power alcohol buses. Engines.
We're going to get to the diesel thing before I have to leave.
Yes, well, I'm telling you right now that you could take biodiesel and mix it 50-50 with alcohol and put it in your diesel engine with no modifications. And I've done that.
Diesel is over $4. And
Oh, I know, but-
from Eugene, it's not local anymore. It's coming from Eugene, and they are just sucking us dry.
Well, come on, Eugene is pretty local compared to 10,000 miles from
That's
the Middle
true.
East.
Well,
Okay?
it's right here. And then
But
bought
but
out.
the thing about biodiesel is that no one is growing anything to make biodiesel. If you took all the vegetable oil in the United States and made biodiesel with it, you'd only replace 2, 3, 4, 5% of all the diesel in the United States. That's because plants don't make oil very well. A whole acre of soybeans will only make 50 gallons of oil. But an acre of, you know, any of these other crops, it's 1,000 gallons of alcohol or more. So nature makes carbohydrates a lot better than oil. And so ultimately, there's nothing wrong with biodiesel, really. It's way cleaner than petroleum diesel. It's about the same dirtiness as gasoline, but it doesn't add to global warming because it's from a plant, and that's really good. So biodiesel is a good thing, but alcohol is more flexible and versatile. And so we have a 600 horsepower engine, which makes 200 kilowatts of power if you put it on a generator. And we're in negotiation right now with Burning Man to replace their diesel generators with alcohol generators.
Yeah.
But this has a specialized high compression alcohol engine that bolts on right where a diesel engine would bolt on, because unlike cars, all big diesel engines have one of 3 bolt patterns. So it's standardized, and you can put it on in replace of tractor trailers, combines, tractors, generators. So, this engine that we've worked with the manufacturer on is meant for 5 years, continuous operation, that's really tough. And it runs on alcohol. And the byproduct coming out of the exhaust pipe is carbon dioxide and water, which you can run right into your greenhouse.
Is it Martinelli? Martinelli that is the company that's supporting you with all this?
No. It's because we signed a non-disclosure, I can't give you their name.
Potential
But they're a company that interfaces between billionaires and where they want to invest. And so they examine companies for sound business plans and then present it to their billionaires, and the billionaires invest in private companies. So we're not letting them invest in our company, Blume Distillation. They're only getting to invest in the Watsonville plant, which will be a joint venture between our company and them. So they don't get control of us at all. They just get the lion's share of the profit from Watsonville. But the point is, this company, don't look at this as a bad thing, because this company that we're dealing with is so excited. They think they can repeat this over and over again in communities around America, because there's nothing really going on for big investors that make obscene profits like this would.
Martinelli has signed an MOU.
Yeah,
and
Martinelli said...
We have several customers that have signed MOUs to purchase systems, but they're waiting to see our new 60,000 gallon system.
Yeah, see, we're putting a prototype on the floor of our future smaller systems. It's easy for us to make these bigger ones, but what we are also developing right now are systems that go all the way down to 20,000 gallons a year. It's harder to make something economic and small than it is bigger. So just like the Tesla came out with a sports car first, and made money on that, and now they're coming out with a consumer car. They had to start with the thing that made them more money, and that's why we're building bigger plants first for businesses, and then smaller ones for farms and small entities like 10 acres. So that's what we're raising money for here today. This is our current facility, which I just spent every dime I personally have to buy this land. These are all greenhouses, all these horizontal things you see. We're going to grow different crops in them from different parts of the world, and we'll simulate climates in each greenhouse. So there'll be a desert climate, there'll be a rainforest climate, there'll be a marsh ecosystem, there'll be, from around the world, we'll be able to show crops that can be made into alcohol, over 50 crops. And we already are having people come from around the world to visit us. On the 25th, a company's coming to see us from Colombia. What we're going to take, and this is your waste question, the pulp left over from harvesting coffee. For those of you who don't know, coffee beans are not a pod with beans inside. They're a cherry, and we take the pit out, and that's what we make into coffee. And the fruit is thrown away and bulldozed into rivers every year. So we're showing them how to take the pulp, which is otherwise an environmental disaster. It's full of caffeine, it kills everything in the rivers. Caffeine is a neurotoxin, that's why it gets us buzzed. Plants make caffeine to kill insects. It's an insecticide. So basically we take the pulp, we make alcohol with it, so we keep it out of the rivers, and then the byproducts from that can be pumped right back up into the coffee plantations, avoiding the need for chemical fertilizer. So that's what we're working on with people in Colombia right now. And if you can believe this, it's like, you guys don't know me, but until I started having to play with adults and raise money, I used to have hair like Antonio's and big beard, and I was definitely the prototypical hippie. So it's really weird that the DEA is coming to our company saying, well, we want farmers in Colombia not to grow cocaine, and we think your alcohol thing is just really great, and we want to give you money to put up plants for demonstration in Colombia so that they can see that they can, grow, make alcohol. You don't believe us, do you? No, but if you want to give us money from the DEA for us to have a revolution against the oil companies, we'll take it. Okay? And they came to us and said, yeah, we got all this money, we have to make something out of it because all the other money got stolen. And so we have to show something sexy. Yours is a sexy project. So can we give you money to build an alcohol plant? I mean, we haven't taken it yet, but we want to make sure there's no strings attached. But anyway, yeah, so we have a lot of exciting things going on. Now, I want to just, because I don't want to keep you really late, I'm going to wrap up with a couple of closing comments. This, by the way, we will be training people in how to make alcohol in our equipment there, as well as doing all this stuff that people will come to us from around the world to see. But in case some of you knew this already, I'm one of the gray-haired permaculture instructors that have been doing this forever, and Bill Balls and I used to teach together back in the 90s. And I've been doing permaculture since before he named it permaculture in the 80s. So I'm one of the grandfathers of that kind of ecological design. So this will also be an incredible permaculture demonstration in addition to the energy stuff. These two buildings here, industrial buildings, are where we have our offices, and our whole alcohol fuel production will be in here. Plus we do fabrication and inventing in this area. These are shade crops, so we can show forest crops being made for alcohol. These are shade houses, which are currently growing ferns and pretty soon shiitakes, but we'll also be growing crops that you would grow in a forest without cutting down the forest and make profit from the energy. Anyway, this is an amazing facility which is already getting visitors, but we'll actually have things to show you starting maybe in January in terms of alcohol being made and that kind of stuff. That's one of the reasons why we're raising money right now for Blume Distillation. And let me give you the kind of closing comments, and then anybody who's interested in talking about that part of it, I'll make a few comments about that. Right now the world uses 500 billion gallons of fuel a year. Now, a few years ago when somebody would throw the number 500 billion at us, most of us would say, wow, that's a big number. Then the Wall Street crash happened. Okay? And suddenly 500 billion, it's an everyday number now, right? I mean, trillions were lost in the I was going to say the S&L crisis, which lets you know how old I am. That was the first Bush's disaster. But, so 500 billion gallons a year is what the whole world uses in gas and diesel. Now, in rough numbers, you could, if you really cranked up for it, build plants for about $2 per gallon of capacity. Okay? So that makes the math pretty simple to do. That would mean to replace all the fossil fuel, liquid fossil fuel on the planet would only cost $1 trillion. Right? $1 trillion. That's really pocket change for a world energy system. And how would we do that? Well, if the United States, instead of spending $11 trillion trying to get Iraq's oil out from underneath the sand, basically, with all of our war there, if we would have just used $1 trillion and gave that money there, we have capitalism now. If we lent that money to every country around the world to make their own fuel, not only would they have all their own fuel and no more oil-based fuel, we'd be reversing climate change, but what you didn't see is that the byproducts that come out of the alcohol plant after you make the alcohol are mushrooms and vegetables and fish and all these things we make with the byproducts. It's a food and fuel system is what we do, and we didn't have time to get into all those byproducts today. But in this area right here, this set of greenhouses, right here, these dark areas are all dirt-covered greenhouses right now. The alcohol production will go here. What will happen in this first greenhouse are long, 150-foot long, very inexpensive, third world style. Yeah, we could show this. Go back to Yeah, this is some of the byproducts. I'm gonna whip through them really fast. You can grow vegetables, we can make mushrooms on the byproduct, we can raise fish, although not in rivers, but actually in greenhouses, and we can make building materials from the fiber left over. Go ahead, Tom. This is starting a bunch of basil, next. Basil growing in the solution left over that's full of nutrients from alcohol production, so this is semi-hydroponic here, and then this takes all the nutrients out so that the water is full of oxygen and can be given to fish. It takes the nutrients from the fish and grows the vegetables. Some of you have heard this called aquaponics. So the fish are a protein source for people who eat meat. Next. And this is what a system could look like with our distillery in the middle. I'm just going to do this fast. It's in my book. The book's in your library too if you don't want to buy one. You start off with water and sunlight. You have a cornfield or any kind of crop. This is just using corn as an example. The grain goes into the distillery. Out comes alcohol, carbon dioxide from fermentation. You have liquid leftovers from distillation. You have the grains left over. So those go down, just moving down quickly. You can grow mushrooms, earthworms, fish, and vegetables using the CO2, the nutrients, and the waste heat from the alcohol process. You end up with products like earthworm castings, mushrooms, fish emulsion, vegetables, and a little 10,000 gallon per year plant, like the one you saw I made in the 80s. That's how much revenue it can generate with the byproducts. You'll see that the alcohol is actually the smallest part of the system. So by the time we take all the stuff coming out of the alcohol plant, the byproducts, we make all these things, and that is how much money we make. And I would hire 10 people at middle class wages to provide these products in your community. You see, now when I first devised this, I talked to a farmer in the Midwest, and I said, are you telling me on my 1,000-acre corn farm, if my high school son put up this alcohol plant and had 25 acres of my 1,000 acres, and he did this, he'd make more money than me? I said, sir, I'm afraid to say that's true. He goes, good. Maybe he'll stay on the farm. And I said, and he'd hire up to 40 of your neighbors. He goes, that's good, because downtown is closed up. Those people need money to spend down there. And I said, but of course it doesn't end there, sir, because if your son hires 40 people in your town of 1,000, when it comes time to elect the next mayor, he'll be elected. Because he'll be the only guy who's created jobs in this community in years. He goes, that boy always was up to no good. Politics would probably be just what he needs to end up in. So anyway, I'm just letting you know that in permaculture, nothing ever goes to waste. Every surplus, it's not a waste, it's a surplus, goes to something else. And then you can sell the alcohol at your local station, which we're going to be manufacturing these as well. There's a tank inside. It's totally legal with the fire codes nationwide, and you can have your card swipe there and fuel your vehicles. And guess what? When you burn alcohol, the exhaust coming out can be cleaner than the air going in, which is a whole nother story. So you don't have to feel guilty driving your pickup truck to move your bag of groceries home from the co-op, all right? So $1 trillion would do it for the whole planet. And you know, you'd have all that food being produced in addition, you'd have all the energy, and if everyone in the world had all the food and all the energy they needed, what would be left to fight over? You'd probably find something. But it would be really hard to find something when everybody has what they need in energy and food. And if there's a reason that I keep being in this business, it's that vision, that once this takes off, there's no stopping it. And I'm kind of resenting that I have to be the guy who manufactured the equipment, but I'm doing it, and unfortunately, we need money for that. So we do have the opportunity for people to invest in our company. We still need $5 more million to go completely commercial. We've gotten all of our engineering done. We're building our prototype right now. It'll be up and running probably by the end of the year in Watsonville. We're already taking orders on the bigger plants, but the smaller ones that we think are important for small-scale entrepreneurs are what we're trying to finish now. And We have 15 pieces of new technology that have never been done in alcohol fuel before, which totally reduce the energy, reduce the amount of time it takes, reduces the capital cost to buy the equipment for the producers, and provides a lot more jobs. And so that is what we're trying to finish up with our money so we can market an advanced system that totally can sweep the world. And we got people calling us from all over Latin America, all over Africa, and they're screaming at us to get it done. We, are still raising money. I won't talk in detail about the investment here, but if you want to schedule a time to talk with us, if you're a kind of person who does either know investors or you yourself invest from time to time, Karen here up front will have a calendar over the next couple of days where you can meet with us privately about that, and we have financial documents which we can give to anyone today who thinks that they are in a position to invest some money. So, and then you can call us and pick a time and we can talk about it. So I'm letting you know that the revolution will not be televised, and that's good because they won't see us coming.
Yeah.
By the time they find out that all these little plants are everywhere, it'll be way too late. So, this is the future we want to have. It's not going to happen unless we make it happen, because if we don't make it happen, we get oil shale, tar sands, coal to gasoline, and we get a world that nobody wants. So if we want it to be different, it's up to us to do it, and we're up to it. We're up to it. So I'm going to ask you to do something for me. Some of you have seen me do this before, so bear with me. I swear to God, this is not a woo-woo California thing, all right? So I want everybody to take a deep breath in and blow it out. Oh, you're in trouble now, because the word conspiracy means to breathe together. And we are now part of the alcohol revolution. Thank you for coming today. I'll be around here for a little while to talk to you. And please, if you think about investment, talk to Karen. We'll be around at the hotel across the street, and we have lots of appointment times to talk to people.
Go ahead.
And of course, you can talk with us about anything else with alcohol as well. Sorry I didn't get to all the questions, but sometimes that happens. Tomorrow, if you know people up north, you might want to go to Williams. At 5 o'clock at the Grange, we're having another presentation there, so send your friends. And it'll have a whole bunch of things that you didn't even hear about today, because two were never the same. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not for sure.